The crisis everyone saw coming too late. The warnings were there. The signals were visible. But certainty arrived only after damage was done. To understand why the crisis everyone saw coming still arrived too late, we need to examine how modern systems process warning signs. In banking, foresight is rarely about lack of information. It is about interpretation. Signals compete with noise. Risks compete with incentives. Today, crises are preceded by reports, forecasts, and debates. Analysts raise concerns. Regulators flag vulnerabilities. Markets whisper discomfort. Yet action is delayed. Not because danger is invisible, but because it is ambiguous. Early warnings rarely look urgent. They appear as trends, not shocks. Gradual increases in leverage. Persistent imbalances. Concentration that feels manageable. Each signal alone seems insufficient. Together, they form a pattern recognized only in hindsight. The system is designed to move slowly until it cannot. Acting too early carries costs. Acting too late carries consequences. Between those extremes lies hesitation. And hesitation is where most crises grow. Experience reinforces this behavior. Acting on false alarms damages credibility. Waiting preserves stability until proof appears. Proof, unfortunately, arrives at the worst possible moment. This is how predictable crises remain unprevented, not through ignorance, but through caution. And once caution hardens into delay, momentum takes over. As warning signs accumulated, the system normalized them. Each indicator was contextualized, explained, and absorbed. Nothing broke. Markets functioned. Stability persisted. The absence of immediate consequence became its own reassurance. Institutions adjusted at the margins. Slightly higher buffers, updated models, carefully worded guidance. These responses acknowledge risk without confronting it. They preserve calm while postponing decisive action. Regulators face constraints beyond data. Political pressure, market sensitivity, uncertainty about timing. Intervening too forcefully risked triggering the very panic they sought to avoid. Silence often felt safer than alarm. Banks responded similarly. Risk was monitored, not eliminated. Exposure was managed, not reduced. As long as profits continued and funding flowed, urgency remained low. The system rewarded continuation over correction. Public discourse mirrored this pattern. Warnings competed with optimism, skepticism with growth narratives. Without a clear trigger, attention drifted. Risk fatigue set in. Concerns lost momentum. This environment created a dangerous calm. Everyone sensed something was wrong. No one agreed. It was time to act. The system moved forward on borrowed confidence, waiting for clarity that would only arrive after collapse began. By the time certainty emerged, options had narrowed. The window for prevention closed quietly, and what followed felt sudden, even though it had been forming for years. The conflict peaked when uncertainty finally gave way to inevitability. Events moved faster than debate. Signals that once felt theoretical became real, measurable, undeniable. By then, the system was reacting, not choosing. Institutions scrambled to contain damage. Liquidity tightened. Confidence fractured. Decisions that had been postponed for years were made in days. What could have been gradual became abrupt. What could have been managed became emergency. This moment revealed the system's deepest weakness. Not blindness, but delay. Everyone had seen the pieces. Few believed they would align this way. Risk had been acknowledged, modeled, and discussed, but never confronted with urgency. As pressure mounted, coordination replaced caution. Emergency tools returned. Guarantees were extended. Support flowed. The crisis was addressed, but not prevented. The cost of hesitation became visible everywhere. The emotional weight of this realization lingered. Knowing a crisis was predictable did not make it avoidable under existing incentives. Acting early required accepting visible costs for invisible benefits. Waiting shifted costs into the future, where accountability softened. This is how foresight fails in complex systems, not through lack of intelligence, but through misaligned timing. By the time everyone agrees, it is already too late. The buildup ended not with surprise, but with regret. A shared understanding that clarity arrived only after options disappeared. The climax was not the collapse itself, but the recognition that it could have been mitigated. That knowledge lingered longer than crisis. Stability returned, but confidence and foresight weakened. The resolution is uneasy. Systems adjusted, rules tightened, memories sharpened, but incentives remained largely intact. The same pressures that delayed action still exist. Growth still competes with caution. Calm still discourages urgency. Today, the system watches for signals with greater sophistication, but interpretation remains human. Judgment remains fallible. The space between warning and action still invites delay. The lesson is uncomfortable. Seeing risk is not enough. Acting on it requires accepting disruption before it feels justified. That choice remains rare in any system built to preserve stability. What happened was not a failure of knowledge. It was a failure of timing. And timing, once missed, cannot be recovered. There is a structural reason why the timing always fails in predictable ways. It is not unique to banking. It appears in every complex system where the costs of action are immediate and visible, and the benefits of action are delayed and distributed. Acting early on a crisis that has not yet materialized requires spending real resources, disrupting real markets, and damaging real credibility. To prevent damage that has not yet happened, the people who would pay the cost of early action are identifiable. The people who would benefit from it are not yet known. In democratic and market systems alike, identifiable costs outweigh diffuse benefits almost every time. This is not a failure of rationality. It is rationality operating within a system where the incentives for early action are weaker than the incentives for delay. Regulators who act early and are wrong about the timing look like they caused the disruption they were trying to prevent. Regulators who wait too long and are wrong about the severity can point to everything they did as the crisis was already unfolding. The first outcome destroys careers and credibility. The second produces emergency responses that are celebrated as decisive leadership. That asymmetry explains everything about the timing of crisis intervention, not corruption, not incompetence. Rational actors responding to the incentives the system creates. Changing those incentives requires more than better data or improved models. It requires changing how accountability is assigned, rewarding foresight as it is exercised, not only as it is validated. That is a governance problem, not a financial one. And governance problems are slower to solve than financial ones, which is precisely why the crisis everyone saw coming continues, in one form or another, to arrive too late. Every time. Not because nobody warned, but because warning has never been enough. So what do you think? Are we repeating the same mistake again? The answer, of course, is yes. But saying yes is not the same as being trapped. Understanding the mechanism that produces late action is different from accepting it as inevitable. Systems can be designed to change the incentives, to make early action less costly, to reward the uncomfortable decision to disrupt calm before the calm becomes catastrophic. Those designs exist. Some have been implemented. None have been implemented completely, because implementation requires the same kind of early action in the domain of governance reform that early crisis intervention requires in the domain of finance. Costly now, beneficial later, diffuse in who benefits, concentrated in who pays. The problem is self-similar at every level of the system, which means solving it requires something that institutions are not designed to produce: the willingness to accept a clear and present cost for a future benefit that will be shared with people you will never meet. That willingness is not common, but it is not impossible. It appears when the memory of the last crisis is still fresh enough to make the cost of inaction feel more real than the cost of acting. That window between crisis and forgetting is the only time when the governance reforms that prevent the next crisis feel sufficiently urgent to actually happen. Use it or lose it. Every time, whether we are currently in that window or whether it is already closed again, is the question no model can answer. Only judgment, applied honestly, by people willing to accept the cost of being right too early, over the comfort of waiting until being right is obvious to everyone. That kind of person exists in every system, in every era, The question is always whether the system creates conditions in which they can act, or whether it rewards the people who wait. Until there is no longer any doubt, and no longer any choice, that is not a financial question. It is a question about what we want systems to reward. And the answer to that question determines everything that comes next. The crisis